Hey everybody, James W. Falcon here, and welcome to another segment, actually segment number 2 of the series called That Dude Called Dad. Thank you for joining me. Before we go any further, I want to first say thank you to everyone that watched the very first segment. Have gotten some very, very positive responses, and the feedback has just been really solid and congratulatory and uplifting. I've been encouraged by the way that first segment has touched people's lives. So that's the name of the game. That's what we are in the process of doing. So this is a series, a documentary, a small portion of a bigger picture, bigger scope of things called Encouragement is Key and the Encouragement is Key channel. So thank you so much. So kind of jumping into things, again, I'm just lounging here in my basement and just kind of doing some reflecting. So before I go any further, I want to share some information with you with regard to that very first segment. So if you did not see the first segment, just stay tuned, because you'll be watching this segment as part of a series of things that have been uploaded on to the Encouragement is Key channel. It plays on a continuous loop, and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you didn't catch the first segment, you will. Just hang in there, and it'll be looping back around for you to see in just a bit. All right, so to kick off segment number 2, let me give you a recap of segment number 1. So the first segment, I talked about the importance of being a man of substance. So this whole series called A Dude Called Dad, That Dude Called Dad, is an attempt to kind of counterbalance some of the thoughts, the negative opinions, perceptions, and whatever the statistical analysis and outcomes and all of those things are out here regarding African American fatherhood in particular. And quite frankly, as I stated in the first segment, I'm tired of hearing that, because it leaves the impression to anybody who has a keen ear, it leaves the impression that there are no African American fathers, or kind of gives you the impression that if there are any African American fathers, that they are doing a very poor job at parenting. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, as an African American man, I would say that all of us dads, regardless of race, culture, creed, are challenged. There's no doubt about that. But what I wanted to do is to provide some very solid, heartfelt, impactful segments, lessons that I've learned from my dad. And because he and I had an incredible dad-son relationship. And he was not perfect, nor am I. But the lessons that he taught me are timeless, they're ageless. And so what I want to try to do is to share some of those things to men and women out there who might find the information helpful, number one. But again, the whole point of this is to let folks know that there are African American fathers who are phenomenal and who have made a lasting impact on their children and on their families and on the generations to come. And so that's what this is all about. So That Dude Called Dad is for those persons out there who regard their father as a distant memory, or as a figure that they have not been able to touch, understand, embrace, get to know, whether he was in the home or not. Because just because you are there or present does not mean that you have made yourself available. And it does not mean that the people around you have had the opportunity to touch and understand and communicate and fellowship and embrace you. So it goes both ways. So instead of saying that dude somewhere out there, what I'm attempting to say is that person that people refer to as my father, well, he happens to be my dad. He's not just one half of the team that contributed to the process of me being here. He is dad. He's not just my father, a donor. He is dad. And that is, there's a vast difference between the two. So this segment, this series, this documentary, That Dude Called Dad, that's what it's all about. And that's the point and purpose behind that. So make sure you stay tuned so you can catch segment 1 if you have not caught that just yet. So segment 2. So what I want to talk to you about for this particular segment is the importance of good communication. And this was a lesson that my father definitely impressed on me. He made a huge impact on me and in my life. And it is in turn an impact that I'm hoping to make on my children and my grandchildren, because it's just really, really important. In the first segment, I shared with you a little bit about the background of my father in terms of him being a knucklehead in his earlier years, and then later on becoming a man of substance. Not just because he acquired knowledge, not just because he went from being a person who couldn't read and write to a person who was just filled with so much knowledge and information it was almost scary. Not just because he went back to school in his 50s and got his high school diploma and then enrolled and became a sociology major in college. Not because of those things. My dad was a man of substance. My dad was an effective communicator because he measured his words. He took what he knew, and he was a student of how he felt, and he was masterful in packaging that and delivering that to me as his son in a phenomenal way. And it's just when I think of these kinds of things, it chokes me up. It really does, because I know how I am. I struggle sometimes in my effort to communicate. I've heard most of my life, people have given me a lot of kudos, high fives, slaps and pats on the back. I've had so many wonderful things said to me about my ability to communicate, and it's interesting. I don't see myself as anywhere near the communicator that my dad was. And again, for those of you just joining in or just watching this second segment, I shared in the first that my father passed away when I was 19. I am now 45 years old, and these lessons that he lived and modeled and taught and shared with his heart and soul it's been about what I would consider to be about 150 to 200 years worth of wisdom, knowledge, and mentorship that he kind of was able to squeeze into 19. So here I am at 45. But again, going back to what I was saying, so I don't consider myself nearly the communicator because I still have a lot to learn about that whole packaging process, getting it from here and putting it in the out here and sharing that with people so that they can really get a good understanding of what I'm trying to say. And I'm laughing because a couple weekends ago, I had my grandson, one of my grandchildren. I have 4. I had one of my grandsons, and I had my youngest daughter. And talking about communication, I'm laughing because it was so funny. I should have videotaped this for everybody to benefit from it, because I'm laughing now 2 weeks later, but it was a scream, because what I was doing purposely was getting my children's attention and then just talking a bunch of gibberish to see what they would say and do to get their reaction. And I would say stuff like, "Hey kids, listen, I need your attention for a second." And they would stand up or gather around. And then I would say, "Look, what I want you to do, well, do you remember what I told you when you had to, go over and do you know what I mean?" And I would do stuff like that on purpose, like starting sentences without finishing, and conveying thoughts in segments. And it was so funny because the first time, second time after doing that, my kids literally were like, "Dad, Pop, what are you saying? Like, what are you talking about?" And you can see that they were frustrated with me because I wasn't making sense. And that's one of my fondest memories, being with my youngest and my grandson, that particular grandson, because I think it's really indicative of this lesson and this point that I want to share. As fathers, we have to be men of substance, but we also have to be good communicators. Never mind the educational component. Never mind that, because I don't want you to get caught up in needing or thinking that there is a need to have a particular educational level involved in this process. But when I say to be an effective communicator and to understand what it means to be a participant of good communication, what I mean by that is we've got to make sure that what we're saying really is coming from a place of passion. Place of passion from our head and our heart. We've got to make sure that we pour everything into what it is we're wanting to communicate. And that's important as fathers, because we're setting up the next generations, plural, with something. We're providing tools, and we've got to be able to make sure that what we're saying doesn't frustrate them. And what we're saying, they can at least use it in the moment and do something with that information. It's more than just telling a child to do something. Obviously that is a component of parenting, but what I'm saying about being a good communicator and the importance of good communication is we got to remember we're sowing seeds into a child's life, and those seeds are going to blossom, they're going to bloom, they're going to produce some kind of plant or fruit. And some of that producing process we'll be able to witness in our lifetimes, in these right now days and years. But a good portion of that, if we are effective, our children, will be able to benefit from years later. I'm 45 years old, about to tell you some things that I remember, and watching and seeing and remembering what my dad did and what he said, from being a wee little fella. Okay? And here I am, 45, still remembering those experiences and those lessons, and hope, as the Lord wills, that I will never forget them, and I will do my own packaging process of those lessons to be able to give that information to my children. So, let me give you a few examples. My dad taught me something that was really, really important. He said, "Son, in order for you to be intelligent," this was his definition. His definition of intelligence was to be able to know how to speak to different kinds of people in different settings. We lived in the heart of East Baltimore, and in the heart of East Baltimore, there's a multicultural mix. In the neighborhood we lived in, it was predominantly African American by the time, or at least approaching being predominantly African American by the time I was about 10 years old, somewhere around there. And when my dad would sit on the porch, or when he would come outside, I used to see and hear this often. Somebody in a car would be passing by, beep the horn, beep, 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 "Hey, Falcon, what's happening, baby?" And my dad would go, "Hey, what's happening, baby? How you doing? What's up?" And it was just a very fluid, easy process for him to spit that out, because he could relate to friends and family and neighbors in that setting in our little world in East Baltimore. But my dad was also very effective in his public orations in church and at work. I had a chance to sit and listen to this man, and his word choice, his word selection, his delivery. I truly believe if my dad was still alive, and if he had a few breaks here or there, he would be a world-renowned speaker and communicator. He was just that masterful in his communication. And from watching how he flowed and what he did and said in different settings, I got his definition. It made sense to me. when I was about 6 years old, maybe 7 or 8, somewhere around there. My dad took me to the barber shop, and it was a regular, either every Saturday or bi-weekly kind of an event. He would go to the barber shop. He would take me with him, and I'll never forget. We would catch 2 buses to this particular barber shop on the east side, and it was for us. It was a cultural hub. It was something men did on Saturday morning, and you got a chance to be exposed to some aspects of manhood that were educational, they were funny, they were demanding. I mean, it was a really rich setting, and it still is in many respects and in many communities. And so we're sitting there one day, and we had walked into a conversation about religion. Okay, now, in many workplaces, in many environments, they tell you 2 things, 2 conversations never ever to have, because they are sure to get you in trouble, because you're liable to put your emotions and your beliefs on display in such a way that it could be offensive to your coworkers. But they tell you never to get into a discussion about religion and politics. And they tell you as an employee, especially when you come into new employer relationship settings, you get new jobs and new departments, new companies. As part of nowadays, as part of the presentation of an orientation package or some kind of orientation, some kind of training. Well, my dad didn't get that memo, okay, because he walked into this setting. He's got his youngest son in tow. And we sit down, and my dad does this. He nudges me. He says, "Son, watch this, watch this." And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, here we go. This is it. And the owner of the barber shop was some kind of a religious leader. I can't remember with what denomination, what church, but what religion, but I know he was some kind of a religious leader, some kind of an elder. And he was really passionately talking about religion. And my dad purposely jumped into conversation on the opposing side of this barber. And literally, he did it to start friction. And I remember him, as we sat down, got our coats off. It was winter, so it was cold. And I remember him going back and forth. And he would make these powerful points. And he would make some stinging comments, and he would purposely oppose whatever was being said. And I remember looking up as a kid going, man, this ain't cool. We might not get out of this thing with all that we came into it with. Like, we might have to run. And I remember thinking as a kid, I'm glad we're sitting close to the door, because we might need to head out real fast. And so this went on for a while, and I remember the barbershop was filled. About 20 people in this barbershop. A little small room, smoke-filled, hair on the floor, cold outside. And I remember my dad going back and forth. And what was amazing was he was able to stand his ground by making some good, solid points as the opposer of the majority of the conversations. And I remember there were about 6 different men that were looking at my dad, glaring. Hands were waving and fingers were pointing and a bunch of different things. I mean, it was thick. And then I remember my dad nudging me, and he said, "Watch this." And then he totally flipped his perspective and stance and started to side with them. But he did it so subtly that they didn't even realize until minutes into the conversation that he was now agreeing with them. And I remember it was almost as if, and it didn't really happen, but kind of giving you a cinematic description. It was almost as if the thick cigar and cigarette smoke had cleared, right? It was like we were in a rainy, stormy day, and then at this point, like the clouds had kind of cleared, and my dad was emerging as the hero, because now that little circle of all of the people that were involved in that conversation, now my dad was starting to affirm them, and they were affirming him, and he nudged me again. He didn't look at me, didn't say anything. He just nudged me again as if to say, Did you catch that? And I remember when we left and we were walking home, I said, Dad, did you think at any point in time a fight was going to break out? And he said, no, son, never did. He said, because I was in control of the conversation the whole time. And I remember thinking, first of all, that was an expensive lesson. You gamble. All I wanted to do was get a haircut. I didn't want to wake up and step into a fight and have to run from a barber shop. So thanks, Dad. Was the first thing I thought. But the other thing I thought was, wow, that was amazing. If I could ever be able to communicate like that, it would do me well. Beyond the knowledge, beyond the acquisition and the acquiring of information. My dad, at this time in his life, you figure he and my mom, again, my mom had me when she was 44. My dad was 45 years old. So again, I'm 7, 8, 9, 10-ish around this time. So you figure he's about 55 years old at this point. And what's amazing about that was it was much more than just, hey, I'm smart or intelligent and I got information. As a matter of fact, he would say to me, son, if you are good at anything, you never ever have to brag. If you are great at sports, if you are a good dancer, whatever it is you do well, you never have to mention it because your actions, your passion, and your activities will speak for themselves. So I'm privileged to be able to tell you this next piece. Everything that my dad acquired as knowledge, he, to me, was able to use that knowledge on me for his family. And he was, to me, he knew which tool to use, and he pulled those tools well out of his toolbox. One time I was playing, I guess at this point I'm a little bit older than 10. It was the summertime, springtime, I remember. I don't think I was in school. And I remember coming into the house and into the living room where my dad sat in his favorite chair. And I remember my mother was having a moment. My mother was in the kitchen, and she was clearly upset. How do I know? Because pots and pans, she was banging them in the cabinets, boom, and boy, and I could hear her go, you think you're talking to me, and blah, blah, blah. And, I literally could tell that my mother was very upset. Now, here's an insert. My mom stood about 6'1". My dad was about 5'11". They were both 200 plus pounds. And I don't care whether you're a child or a grown-up, they're solid people. Like, you don't want to get folk that big upset. And if they are upset, you want to clear the room until they get it together, because it just may not be good, right? So, not that my dad or mother were ever threatening to me in any kind of way. There was definitely no physical issues in our household, no abuse of any kind. But clearly, I could tell that the kitchen was off limits, okay? So my dad, there he sat in his favorite chair in the living room, just as cool as a cucumber, because that was Dad and Mom's MO, right? Whatever got them upset had to be huge. So my dad sat there, and I'm thinking, hey, you need to go in there and straighten her out, Dad. Now, obviously, I didn't say that, but in my mind, okay? I'm thinking, you need to handle your business. Why is your woman all kinds of jacked up in the kitchen? And I can't remember what I said or how I said it to my dad, but however it came out, my father said this to me. He said, son, come in and have a seat. Now, whenever my parents said have a seat, what they were about to tell you after the phrase have a seat was vital. It was really important that you heard what they were going to tell you and you got the message. My dad said, son, have a seat. And this is what he told me. He said, son, that woman in the kitchen is your mother, and that's my wife, and I love her dearly. And she is having a moment right now. But here's what you need to know. What I'm going to do is allow her to have her moment, and then your mother and I are going to talk, and everything will be fine. And that's a promise. Secondly, he said to me, and I want you to remember something, son. He said, In these kinds of situations, in these moments, pay close attention to what you're going to say. He said, because if you say the wrong thing after the dust settles, no amount of I'm sorry's is ever going to fix it. Yes, the person will forgive you. Yes, there will be a period of time where there will be a mending of the relationship and the moment. But what you say will hurt, and it may hurt for some time. So he said to me, make sure that what you say, you mean to say. And make sure that whatever shouldn't be said, you take great pain to not communicate that. And I remember thinking to myself, first of all, number one, in all that was happening, like, how in the world did this man have that much clarity? Like, that scared me. The fact that he could be so calm. And I'm in a number of different lessons. And even at that young age, I think the thing that really blew me away then, like it blows me away now, is my dad communicated a bunch of things. Number one, he connected the moment with the person and the person in the other room with him. He had me to understand very early, I don't care what your mother's doing or saying. She's my wife, and she's your mother, and I love her, and that's that. So my mother's moment never chipped away any value from her in my father's eyes, mind, and heart. That was extremely powerful. Number two, what was really, really awesome is that my dad made a commitment years earlier to the person having a moment, and that commitment was not wavering. And there were just so many points from that. And again, as a 10, plus year old child, I understood that then. But that lesson, that experience gets sharper and sharper the older I get. And I say to myself, man, what an incredible standard. That's an incredibly high bar to aspire to reach. And I'm still a student of my dad and his lessons and teachings and all, my mom as well. I'm not there yet. And I think there's a challenge for me, and I'm sure for all of you watching, men and women, to make sure that we are good communicators. Do we have moments? Absolutely. Would we like to have our children think of us as superheroes? Sure, maybe. But do we all have feet that touch this ground and this planet called Earth? Absolutely. So I think it's important to have lessons like this stay in the forefront of our minds to give us a standard. And I think we shouldn't beat ourselves up when we don't make that standard. But I think, just like my dad say, if you get into enough conversations with people that love you, spouses, children, family members, we, as we get older, should slow our rolls enough that our anger and our passion doesn't overshadow and eclipse the need to communicate the right things at the right time. Those were just a few of the lessons that I've learned from my dad. Again, and I would watch him as to how he would do and say different things. And I would think to myself, wow, this is unbelievable. And it's amazing because of how my dad was, there were many instances that my mother would reaffirm his value to me by making sure she did similar things, affirm her connection to him, always had her love for my dad on display, and made sure that I knew that above and beyond his shortfalls and his errors and any missteps that he had, character flaws or whatever the case may be, that I knew one thing, that man, that dude, was my dad. Being a good communicator is vital. Here's something from the heart that's really, really important to know. What we say to our children It does matter. They are recording every word we say. And I want to be able to say 20, 30 years from now, or I would like to be able to know that the time that I'm going to take, and again, I'm talking present tense because I am still a student and it is still an ongoing process, that the time that I'm going to take with and for my children is going to be worth their value. It's going to affirm them, and it's going to set them up to be the best possible children, students, members of society, adults, and perhaps future parents that they can possibly be, because of how I can frame their little worlds, their hearts and their minds, with the words that are needed. Be a man of substance, men, but also try your level best to be a good communicator. It's important to every single person around you. This has been James W. Falcon for another segment in the ongoing series and documentary called That Dude Called Dad. Hope you can continue to enjoy these segments and that you can continue to come back week after week. And do me a favor, please pass along these links, or the link rather, to this broadcast. If you're watching it, great, you found us, so share the link. Send the link to this broadcast for the Encouragement is Key channel to your friends, to your family members, to your co-workers. Drop it in an email. Post it on your Facebook pages. Send it as a text message through all of your electronic devices. Right now, we are approaching 300 and some odd views, and that's powerful considering we've only had this up and running just a few weeks. This is only the second segment of many that I hope to be able to produce. So many, many thanks to you who have joined us and who have supported us and who perhaps are keeping us in your thoughts and your prayers so that we can continue to share the vital and important message of encouragement. James W. Falcon for the series That Dude Called Dad. We'll be back at you with another segment in the days to come. Do me a favor and remember this in closing. Whatever you do and however you do it, get, be, and stay encouraged. Take care.